mentioned about they'd been deceived by riches. Um, you know, sometimes I think, and it's easy to do. I'm not saying that it's in any way weird or anything. It's just easy to do. But when you've been in the Lord, been walking with the Lord for a long time, and you're kind of accustomed to dealing with opposition, most of us have been in the Lord long enough that much of our opposition in the past came from the idea that a battle between following the Lord or following the world. And by that I mean just live for getting all that you can get and accumulate all you can get and everything else, and that's the preferred life. And so what came out of that tug of war was this idea that you got to do one or the other. And so if you're going to have wealth or anything like that, that means you're going to sacrifice the Lord. Or if you're going to go after the Lord, that means you're going to be poor. And so this false dichotomy got set up and kind of canonized as a biblical thing. And we're still fighting that to some extent. Those of us who have been longer in the Lord than the younger generation, we still kind of think in terms of, well, it's kind of like my mother used to say when she would see folks that were doing pretty well financially. She would always say, and I never could figure it out, but it goes back to this. Well, they may have money, but I bet they're not happy. And it goes back to that. It's one or the other. And one day I finally heard it one too many times, and I said, well, Mom, I can tell you this. I don't have money, and I'm not happy either. So, but it's that idea. And the only reason I say that is because, first of all, we're in a new day, and that paradigm's changed. But the other thing I want to say, too, is I think sometimes if you get people who maybe are very good in business, maybe God does bless them the ability to make a lot of money or to have a lot of resources, and they're able to fund church, able to fund missions and charities and stuff like that, but they almost get guilted over it by folks in the church that don't have two pennies to rub together, but they're spiritual. And they kind of get looked down on. Well, yeah, they may have a lot, but they don't have much going on spiritually, I'm sure. And it goes back to that old thing. Well, we live in a day where the younger generation, by that I mean like the 20, 30-year-olds, have a lot of stuff, but their lives are empty. And they're looking for answers. And that means we're going to have to adopt a new paradigm that meets people where they are instead of shaming them because they have stuff. Because I can tell you this, there's a lot of 20-year-olds today and 30-year-olds today that are making six figures. No, they didn't have to wait. They were 50. They're already doing it. And there's some that makes multiple six figures a year. And if you ever hear interviews with them, it's kind of like, how much you make? Oh, $200,000. Back when I was growing up, if somebody said that, I'd say, my goodness, you're filthy rich. They don't even think of it as that anymore. But what they will tell you is, my life isn't working. I have no answers. And the world that got them in this mess to start with is coming along telling them, well, here, we'll give you some answers. But it gives them the wrong answers. The church has the right answers. So redeeming the time, which is a good thing, redeeming the time means we've got to engage people where they are and not where we think they ought to be. Because if I just try to relate to people where I think they ought to be, I'm going to be about 40 years out of step. And so finding out where they are, meeting them there. You see, that's one of the reasons why Jesus would hang out with folks that respectable people wouldn't. The respectable people were still living with a paradigm from the past. That those kind of people are trash. We're the holy ones because we keep the standards. And yet Jesus, attacking that paradigm, said, these people aren't trash. These are people that I'm going to hang out with because I'm going to redeem them. And it's usually those people who end up changing the world. Because all the disciples were from that crowd. They weren't from the prestigious who's who side. So that kind of feeds in a way to what we're looking at today in Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5. Everyone's favorite passage in Ephesians. That's about the only chapter that ever gets mentioned in Ephesians for most people. And we're going to mention it, but from a different perspective. For one reason is I think the passages such as beating on women, you need to submit. Beating on husbands, you need to do better. Beating on children, you need to get more whoopings if you don't obey. And all that kind of stuff. You hear that so much it gets to where you don't even hear it. It's like the old Charlie Brown school teacher, blah, 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 blah. I want us to look at the issue today of not what is submission, but why is submission. Okay? So keep in mind, big picture. Ephesians is Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus, and he is under house arrest at the time, and what motivated this was Epaphras, who started the church in Colossae, had made his way to Rome to serve Paul for a while. He was going to co-minister with Paul for a while. And so, in the meantime, Paul is introduced to a runaway slave named, what? You remember? Onesimus. Yeah, big name. Nobody ever calls a kid Onesimus. Have you ever noticed that? Of all the biblical names, Onesimus never comes up. But he meets Onesimus. Onesimus, in fact, Paul even mentions when he writes his letter to Philemon, I know he wasn't much of a slave. He was lazy. You couldn't count on him for anything. He was unreliable. But he's a different man now. He's been born again, and now he's very valuable to the ministry. And so Onesimus, as a runaway slave, had a bounty on his head. And so Paul, in Roman culture, under Roman law, slaves were property. Unless they were indentured servants, then they had some rights. But just an outright slave, someone bought at the slave market, was just property. And so if they ran away and were captured, the master, the owner, could do with them whatever he wanted. He could forgive it and just put them back into servitude, or he could put them in prison, or if he wanted to make an example of them, he could kill them. And the law was okay with it. Whatever he wanted to do, it was his call. So you had people who were like bounty hunters going out looking for these runaway slaves. Well, Onesimus had made his way to Rome. Rome had a massive slave population, and it appears he tried to intermingle with it. But somewhere in all that, somebody takes him to Paul, and Paul meets him. Paul shares the gospel with him. He gets saved. Paul begins discipling him, and at some point, Onesimus begins ministering to Paul and for Paul. That's when Paul said, okay, you're useful for the ministry, but we've got to take care of this issue. We can't just ignore it. Now, there's a principle there we're not going to run with today, but there's some things in life we just can't ignore. You know, even if you've been through a massive change and everything's great and you've been doing really good over the years, If you committed a murder 30 years ago, you could have come out after that and been the model citizen and did everything right and been the head of the Kiwanis Club and everything else. But when you got caught, you still have to answer for that murder. Okay? So Paul knew that the only way Onesimus would ever be really effective was to get this matter resolved, or otherwise he'd always be looking over his shoulder. So he takes the opportunity to write a letter to his owner, Philemon. And he writes to him, it's a brief letter, very personal letter, but he lays out the case like an attorney for why Philemon should forgive Onesimus and set him free. Okay? Now, their mail service was kind of like ours. Slow. And so the only way that letter was going to get from Rome all the way over to Asia Minor in Colossae was someone had to carry it. So Epaphras decided he would go back with Onesimus to face Philemon to resolve the matter. So Paul decided, well, since you're going anyway, why don't I go ahead and write this letter to the Ephesians? And since you're going to pass through Ephesus anyway on your way to Colossae, you can deliver it to the Ephesians. Remember, everything that was anything in Asia Minor came through Ephesus. They were the gatekeepers. They were the gateway. And so when this letter got to Ephesus, Paul understood that once they got the letter and they read the letter and probably made copies of it, they were going to pass it on. And it was going to make the way through the circuit of churches in Asia Minor. Now, what's Paul's emphasis here? His emphasis in that letter, remember, he starts out by his normal method of doctrine theology. So he starts out by delivering a doctrinal message about why Jesus came. Okay? And he expresses that message by saying that when Jesus came, his coming was not by accident. That it was God's plan from before creation that Jesus would come and provide redemption, not only for humanity, but for creation. And so Paul then, through the first 3 chapters of Ephesians, is explaining, or more like reminding them of doctrine. Because he had spent 3 years there a decade earlier teaching them this. He had laid the foundation of doctrine then. So he reminds them of this doctrine, and then in the last 3 chapters, he covers the application of that doctrine. Does that make sense? And so it's not enough to know the right stuff. In Paul's mind, you've got to do it. Because if you don't do it, knowing it is worthless. Okay? And so Paul goes into chapters 4, 5, and 6 explaining how to apply what he taught in chapters 1, 2, and 3. So when we get to this section in chapter 5, the chapter started off with a verse of imitate God. And so he's describing what it means to do that. We call that living a Christian worldview. And so keep in mind, and it kind of goes to what we were talking about a minute ago. God offers a way for us to live. And if we will live that way, according to his design, his blueprint, his design for creation is what results in human flourishing. Now, that's the good side. The bad side is, apart from supernatural empowerment, we can't do it. That's the bad side. And so what Paul is saying here is he's not just trying to put an impossible command on them, but what he's telling them is, because you are in Christ, and the Holy Spirit is in you, that new man that's inside of you not only wants to live according to God's design, it can. So when he goes into all the stuff he mentions in chapter 5, and we're going to get into the submission stuff today. And I know submission's a popular topic. You know, it's kind of like suffering. Everybody loves to hear that one too. But when he goes into submission, I don't want us to get bogged down in the weeds. And the reason I don't, and to help with that is, I'm not even going to get into the weeds. I just want to look at submission. Because submission is the issue. When he talks about wives submit, husbands love, children obey, parents don't exasperate and all that, he's just explaining how to submit. This is how it works. So before we get to that, though, I want to make this point. We need to be careful that we don't overlook what I believe to be his most important point in talking about submission here. See, his important point here wasn't trying to put women down, trying to make husbands feel bad, or something along those lines. His point is there's an order to things. In God's design, if we're going to live it God's way and experience the blessings of human flourishing, we have to do it his way. And in his way, there is an order to things. So if you look at Ephesians 5:21, and I'm going to, unlike years ago when we went to a Billy Graham crusade in Atlanta, and it was in the middle of summer, 4,000 degrees, outside in Brave Stadium, every night, stadium packed. And Billy Graham would get up and would lie right to our face. I mean, every night he lied. And this for a week. Every night I knew it was coming. Yep, he lied again. And his lie was, I will be brief tonight. I'd hate for him to have said, I will be long tonight. Because brief was 45 minutes. I'm telling you today, I'm going to be brief. And I tell you why. I've got to go to Columbus to pick up Danita from Trace Diaz. And if I'm late, I don't even want to think about it. So we're not going, like I said, we're not going to get bogged down in this. But I do feel like it fits with what Jan was saying. All right, so Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, the word for submit is the Greek word hupotasso, Hupotasso. It's a military term, and it's the term used to describe people falling into rank. So you're talking about rank order. So everyone can't be general. You know, you got to have some privates. And you got people all in the middle there. Why are people assigned certain rank? Richard can tell us this. He was a general in the guard.
But basically, you have to have the rankings in there to know who is an authority over who.
Okay? And do they just walk down the line and say, okay, I like you. I'm going to make you a colonel. The typical thing is you have to earn your way up the rank. And so through faithfulness, through gaining new knowledge, new skills, by showing that you can handle the authority, you get promoted. You know, when my son was in the Army, he went in, I don't know all this classification, but he was a truck driver. And they sent him to South Korea. And so he got over there, and they got in this long stretch where they were doing nothing. And they were just sitting around the place all day where the trucks were stored. playing cards and whatever else they did. And one day, his commander came by and said, "Hey, I need somebody to go work in the post office." And so my son said, "I'll go." He was bored. He's kind of likes to always be active. "I'll go." So he goes to the post office, does a really good job, and the person in charge of the post office contacted his commander and said, "I want to keep him." Well, he didn't change his classification, but they weren't doing nothing. So he said, "Well, you can keep him till we need him." So he spent most of his time in Korea, where he was supposed to be a truck driver, working in the post office. He got his certification for being a postal worker and got his rank as a postal worker because he was faithful as a postal worker. He didn't get the rank because he was driving a truck. So that's how it works in the military. You get the rank for the job. And what rank were you? Major, okay. So when Richard became major, that didn't mean that all his lieutenants were nobodies. It certainly didn't mean his sergeant was a nobody. Okay? So what I'm saying is when it comes to submission, it's about roles, not value. And so that's why I think one reason why submission gets such a bad rap with people is especially, sorry ladies, but especially ladies, they hear this thing on submission. "Oh, he wants me to be a doormat. He's going to tell me, he's going to abuse me. He's going to..." Who told you that? Well, I know, yeah, we all know. I know a lot of weird stuff too. But it doesn't mean it applies to everybody. It just means some weird stuff happened. But see what happens, and what happened in our country that got us away from this is the world came in and said, "Women, you shouldn't have to put up with that. You're just as good as a man. Better. So why don't you just focus on you? You get your career going. You get independent. You get to the place where you don't need a man. And then if you decide you want one, they'll be all out there begging for you to pick them anyway." And so what happened then is you had the feminist movement, which has run its course now. It's pretty much stuck with probably the baby boomers, baby busters, the Gen Xers. But I'm going to tell you something. A lot of the younger women that are coming up are walking away from it. You know why? They found out it didn't work. Because what it did was, instead of helping them to secure the husbands they were looking for and to have that family experience they so craved to have and to be a mother like they so wanted to be, it pushed men away. And so now you have the 20, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds who are saying, "Where's the men?" Did you know right now, over 40%, almost 50% of young men, 20s and 30s, have walked away from dating? They're done. Now that's the research statistics. So the ones who should be in their prime trying to get married, forget it. And the number one reason they say for why they're not, and there's a lot of reasons, I'm not judging any of the reasons, but the number one reason is that they give is they can't find any suitable prospects. Why? Suitable means they can't find enough prospects who are cooperative. They want to be boss. And they say, "I don't need that. I don't need a hassle when I get home every day. I don't need to be in this tug of war all the time over who's going to control and lead the family. Because what happens with men when they get in those situations, they're either going to ratchet it up and really fight it out, which they end up in jail, or they withdraw. They may still be there in body, but their heart and their passion somewhere else. Now, see, that's where the world's lied to people. And the world's lied to men and told men, you just need to worry about getting your career going, making all the money you can, letting the wife take care of the house, and you just, and by providing for her, you're showing her that you love her. No. Providing for her is just you keeping your word. It doesn't mean that you're showing her love. In fact, if that were true, then no wealthy women would ever get divorced. But they do. No royalty would certainly ever get divorced. But they do. So what I'm saying is, what God is telling us here is, if you want this thing to work, here's how family works. You've got to submit to each other. So that means everybody has a role to play. Because in the biblical use of the term, the word submit means to come under God's arrangement. To come under God's arrangement. God has an order for things. And if we obey, life tends to go well. If outside that order, life tends to turn on us. The biblical principle of authority is that we are faithful where we are. And if we are faithful where we are, then God gives us more. What a blessing it is to see couples who have been married long enough, and they've been faithful to each other over the years, and they get to the point where they're like a smooth operating machine. The cooperation level is so high that if anything were to come up, any fallout were to happen between the two of them, it would be like, what in the world has happened? Because you never hear of any trouble. They're just a smooth operating machine. And when things come up, they don't let them fester. They deal with them because there's trust there. If you have a marriage where the wife's always worried, he's going to try to get the best of me, or he's always worried, I'm not sure if I can trust her or not, you're never going to have cohesion. You're just going to have two people living together who are always butting heads. Well, don't let the amens drown me out. All right. So that's the submit thing. Then he says submit to each other. The only reason I made a point of this is to recognize that he's speaking to these groups, and he's saying within your group, submit to each other. Versus what we may want to do sometimes and say, well, I'm submitted to whoever way out there somewhere that I don't even know. You see that with TV preachers and ministries. You know, I'm not submitting anybody around Dothan. I can tell you that right now. Ain't nobody in Dothan is as spiritual as whoever picked one of them. Kenneth Copeland. Oh, I tell you what, everybody around here is idiots, or they're all in it for the money, or they're whatever. I'm submitted to Brother Kenneth Copeland. He's my church. No, you're not. There is no such thing as submission in the theoretical. Because submission's a choice. And it's a choice that goes against the will. So submit to each other. That means in your interpersonal circle, in your marriage. You know, I've even heard sometimes couples who are having problems They maybe had a lot of problems, but the wife would say, well, I ain't submitting to him, but I'll submit to that husband over there of somebody else. Or the preacher. And that's one reason why a lot of preachers are getting in trouble. It's because they got women in the congregation that won't submit to their husbands. They won't submit to him in every way. And we just had another one this past week that shocked a lot of people. All right, so submit to each other. And then lastly, he said, and do it out of reverence for the Lord. The word reverence here means to fear, withdraw, or avoid with dread. Now let that imagery settle in as you interpret that verse. Submit as you are doing in reverence to the Lord. Now, does that mean we're supposed to be scared to death of God? No. But he's not our buddy either. There's a reverence there. There's a respect and a sense of all that's due God. You see, what that means is he's saying, let your submission to each other be just as it is to God. Now, here's the thing. For us to submit to God, that has to be the first order. Or this lower level submission won't work. Just like when Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Sometimes people like to get focused on that love yourself, love your neighbors part of it. But I'm going to tell you, none of that's going to work right if the love for God is not first. It's the order of things. And the same is true in submission. Submission's not going to work because there's going to be so many times things are going to come up where a wife's going to say, I ain't submitting to him. I tell you what, that's the craziest thing I ever heard in my life. Or the husband's going to say, I ain't going to love her. I tell you what, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of it. And they got all the reasons why they're not going to do their role, not going to submit to each other. But if we keep in mind that by submitting to our spouse, we are submitting to Christ, and keep our submission to him first, then you have no choice but get it right on this lower level. You may say, well, I don't want to. Well, I don't see in there where it says if you want to. I mean, that's just, I know the word if appears a lot in the Bible, but if didn't appear there. It's mandatory. This is just going to be part of it. So that's when he gets into the personal application of it. And that's when he, just a quick summary of the verses. Wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, bring up your children in the training of the Lord. Isn't it interesting? He said fathers there, not parents. So what we've had since the Industrial Revolution was, Mom, bring up your children in the training of the Lord. Because we got Dad out of the house fine. But no, the responsibility falls to Dad. Servants, obey your masters. Masters, treat slaves as you want to be treated. So, the mechanisms in place, this is how to make life work. Not only in the family, but in the workplace. I heard an interesting story today, news piece. Not sure how it works, but they said that there's a growing trend of younger men leaving the workforce. Now, I'm not sure how that works, how they pay their bills, I don't know. But somehow or another, they're just walking away. And they're just saying, you don't have this. And they're going home. Sometimes they may be married and just stay home, keep the kids. or do something else. The wife's making more than them anyway. But they've gotten so frustrated with the work environment and the fact that they can give their life to a company and be put out on the curb the next day. And so there's no loyalty, there's no commitment, and so finally people are getting enough of it and said, fine, I'll just drop out. So we've got here the blueprint on how to turn things around in the workplace and make the workplace work. The point is, we live in a day when people are realizing that what they've been taught by the world doesn't work. So, are we as the people of God going to step up and give these people the truth? You see, it's a matter of blueprints. It's a matter of worldviews. The world is saying you live this way. You just live for number one. And so what has living for number one got them? Lonely, broke, no destiny, no sense of future, no sense of hope, just trying to get from day to day. But they can do whatever they want. Versus Christian worldview that says, here's design. If you'll live this way, life's going to go well for you. See, they already are, the younger generation's finding out this doesn't work. So we need to come along with what does work. And say, well, you know, there is a way. There is a way if you're, you know, part of what the world has told people, young people especially, is you just need to live for you. That's why they've extended adolescence into their 20s. Now, I don't know about you, but at my house, adolescence ended about 12. And after that, I was expected to work like a man and to take on real responsibilities. My parents didn't step in to save me from myself, to save me from consequences. If consequences came, oh well. I always laugh, and people don't get it, but it still makes me laugh when I see these little memes float around of the dad from the 80s. I could say the dad from the 70s. When the little kid's about to stick something in the wall outlet, and the mother runs up there and says, no, honey, no, no. He says, go ahead. And he sticks something in there, and the lights go, bzzz. And he says, I bet you won't do that again. That was kind of life for me growing up. Or when he taught him to swim. Have you seen that one? He and his brother are sitting on the pier, and they're just talking, and the feet in the water like that. And his dad walks up behind him and says, son, it's time to learn to swim. He picks him up and throws him in the water. And he says, swim! And he's drowning, and he throws a floaty thing out there for him. He said, no, grab the floaty. Don't push it away. And then he finally, that doesn't work, and he tells his brother, picks him up and says, go get him. Throws him in. Yeah, now he'd go to jail for that. But he learned to swim, yeah. But see, that's, you know, we've got people now who've been raised under a whole different worldview. A very soft worldview, a view of life that isn't real. That needs a lot of people in place to cushion them from real life. And the cushion's being taken away now. Yeah. And so somebody's got to be there to help these folks. That's why I think God is moving among some of those we call notorious sinners. Is because somehow or another they are stumbling into the truth, getting saved, and they're getting a good dose of it because they're not getting religiously saved. They're getting radically saved because they are coming from nothing. And yeah, they make mistakes and they say stupid stuff sometimes, but they're hanging in there. That's where revival's going to happen. I heard somebody say it recently. I can't remember who it was, but someone said recently, if you're waiting for old-time revival, that's just going to be about exciting services at church and all this kind of stuff going on in the church and like Brownsville, you're going to miss it. It's happening in the streets. It's happening among the notorious sinners. But here's the thing. They're going to need something more than just get saved. They're going to need, this is how to live. They're going to need somebody to teach them this is what it means. Not only to be a Christian, but to live a life that God can bless. And not only will God bless it, but it'll become a testimony to others who were like you. Because they have nowhere else to go. You do understand postmodernism's the end of the line, philosophically. There's nowhere else to go. When you reach the point where you say the only reality's left is the one in your head, there's nowhere else to go once that's proven false. So that's why nihilism, or the idea that life has no meaning, is so prominent in that worldview. But we know that's a lie because we have the truth. So we need to share that truth. So I encourage us today to ask ourselves the question, how committed are we to God's design? How submitted are we to God? And like Jan was saying, praying for opportunities, by all means. But we have to take those opportunities when they arise. If we don't, they'll stop arising. If you're faithful, He gives you more. If you're not faithful, He takes it away. That's part of God's design. Doesn't mean God's bad, mean, mad at you or anything like that. It's just the way life works. Well, Lord, I thank you. Thank you that you've shown us that submission doesn't have to be viewed as a bad thing. It's just us doing the role that we've been assigned to do. And it's relating to you out of reverence. Not trying to treat you as our buddy, our pal, our peer, but reverencing you as God, as creator, as designer. And you've given us the blueprint for how to make this life work, for how to live as true believers. So, Lord, I pray today as we leave this place that you will put in our hearts the desire to submit, to get in rank, to get in our place, to fulfill the role that you've assigned to us. And Lord, help us to be sensitive to opportunities to share the truth with others. Help us, Lord, to have the courage. It could be to share the gospel. It could be to share your blueprint for life. Help us, Lord, to obey, to be sensitive. And I thank you that you are at work and you are saving notorious sinners today. So we just want to say thank you, Jesus. We want to get on board with what you're doing. And we're willing to lay aside what we want you to do to embrace reality. And I pray your blessing on each person that's here today and on their families. I pray in every way they'll be blessed. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for coming.